Welcome to the Bladtcast. Joining me now is musician Robert Mason, whom you may know from Lynch Mob, spending more than a decade and change as the lead singer of Warrant, and also from The End Machine, who have a new album called Phase 2 out this week, which I'm excited to talk about. Welcome to the show, Robert. Nice of you to take the time to chat.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Reading a little bit about you, you're from New York originally, so I always like to know sort of what do you feel like musically you were exposed to that was, maybe, New York centric? Where were the places where when you started going to shows, where were the places you started to see bands? I'm just sort of wondering about all that.
My first arena experience was Madison Square Garden. Seeing Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus at like 2, 3, 4 years old. So
yeah.
Then you realize that, wow, they play music here too, not just have elephants and
right.
So yeah, I mean, seeing shows at the Garden, growing up in anywhere around the New York metro area. I moved out to the burbs. My parents moved us out. Actually before my brother and sister were born. It was just me out to the burbs to make the better life, get out of the city, whole thing. But that just made me go right back into the city every chance I got. And obviously it was a place in the 80s, 90s for me musically as a mecca. That's where all the record companies were. Like, if you're an East Coaster, you go to New York to try to go get a record deal or all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I saw shows all over. Every arena, all the clubs. I started playing in the clubs in my very early 20s, probably straight away. Out in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Manhattan.
Sure, yeah.
Places, but around the whole surrounding area, plus the clubs in the city. Let's see, but I guess getting influential, getting to see those bands in a big concert setting. Back when you could do that, you remember like a year and a half ago when you could.
I do. Yeah. Well, I grew up outside of New York City. So it's like 45 miles in Orange County, where we always said Orange County out there. It's right where the suburbs started to get rural. So
back then it was orange.
Yeah, I know. But then I move out to California and everybody makes fun of me. So somehow it turns into orange. And I'm just like, I'm tired of getting laughed at. I also was like, well, I don't want my kids to grow up saying orange because, but yeah. So, and, it was always like, it was a big deal. I mean, obviously the majority of the shows I would go to would be in the city. But if somebody came out and played at like the local fairgrounds, or, you'd get, there's a venue in Poughkeepsie called The Chance, and the best. Yeah, right. And the best would be, for a long time, there was a great venue in Hoboken called Maxwell's. And it was like, oh, I don't have to park in the city. Just the idea of like driving out, because from where I was, it would take forever to take a train or a bus. It was just faster to drive. And so, yeah, you just definitely grow up. So it's like, for me to go into the city, it was like, this would be somebody I really like. It has to be a big show, You
gotta reserve that for, right, exactly. The marquee acts are like, okay, I need to see this. We'll go see it, whatever play Palladium. Every place there is to play. Limelight was one of the most amazing places because it was just a veritable freak show cornucopia of humanity. And it was just like insane. And I've gone on stage for a show at the Limelight historically. Back when you were lower on the bill, you'd go on later, which is weird. Like Sunday nights was rock and roll church.
Yeah, yeah.
You recall the whole Limelight ethos it's an old monastery and church.
Yeah.
And the pews are gone, and you're performing at the altar, which is dancers hanging in cages, swinging from the ceiling. Every manner of excess and abuse available to humans was happening at every given point. Like little rooms in the back were just the weird.
Yeah, I mean there was like a foam room. Like, look, I was never anybody who was anybody, so I never went to the Playboy Mansion, but I did go to Limelight, and it was like, there's a what room, So I don't have any stories about the grotto, but I do remember being in years before we all walked around with hand sanitizer in our pocket. I'm like, I don't think I should touch anything in here.
Right.
But you would also get. you'd also get to see some great bands there, you know, and it was a really cool venue. It reminded me, just you talking about it. I once saw Chris Rock, the comedian, perform at the chapel at Vassar College, because I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie, and halfway through his set, he's like, "Wait a minute, am I in a church?" And everybody starts laughing. He's like, "Oh, you think it's funny? You're not the ones in a church talking like this, you know?"
Right, yeah.
So but God, I actually hadn't thought about Limelight in a while, because I know, I mean, it changed hands and then it closed, and I'm pretty sure it's a gym now. I have friends who live in New York, and you know it's like I don't even know if it's open right now. But so you know, I was reading, you know, I don't even know if it was just a bio or an interview with you. You know, you talk about an influence on you, and it's somebody that Paul Stanley's always talked about, Steve Marriott from Humble Pie. Absolutely. And I think that, you know, it's not that that's not somebody who's well known, but it's like, you know, people will always think about, you know, you think about Robert Plant and, you know, other people of a similar era. But what was it specifically about Steve Marriott that you thought, I mean, just to you, was that like, oh, that's what a singer is, that's what it should be? Or did you just love the band, or what was it about Steve Marriott?
Well, the first, if I can backtrack even further, allow me a 2-second.
Sure. Yeah.
Here. Tom Jones.
Oh yeah.
A little kid on TV, and my dad would turn me on to, you know, like, "Oh, Bobby, sit down, watch this, watch that." You know, it was the whole, like, playing a record, Mr. Sinatra singing, "Be very quiet, just listen, you know, don't talk." Just, you know, as a little kid. Tom Jones had that unbelievable, like, presence, not just in a jumpsuit, but, you know, not just with women. Yeah, that growly voice, and he wasn't the straight crooner in that older sense, the older generation sense of what that would be. And I remember being influenced by that, saying, "Wow, that guy," you know, not just commanding on stage and the whole Elvis Beatles thing, women throwing their, you know, clothes at him and stuff like that, but that guy's power. And I was just captivated. Steve Marriott had that same sort of thing. He had a very gritty voice. He had a theater background. He was like a child actor.
Oh, wow.
He had kind of like Bon Scott did, that real strong, just couldn't give a rat's ass, but I'm here to, like, grab you metaphorically by the throat, audience, and you're going to believe me. And he had that presence and such an incredibly strong voice. It wasn't operatic. It was blues and grit, and just he sang as though he was hanging out on the thinnest limb of the tree, trying to break it. You know, not safe in the tree, going, "Yeah, I'm just singing to you." It's like, you know, people in the back row, like Rock in the Fillmore. I mean, I have that album. I have that 2 or 3 copies of it. That is sitting displayed right near my turntable right now as we speak. I kid you not. I can go get it, but just trust me, right there.
We'll trust you. Yeah, for sure.
It's one of the greatest live records of all time. And I think I gravitate towards singers that have a genuine, first off, blues-based. I get that. I understand that. Emulating the early soul and R&B and blues artists of the time from America. That's what all British guys were doing, or trying to do, even the Beatles early on. And I think guys like him and Paul Rodgers and Roger Daltrey just always just grabbed me very early on.
And so when you start, you know, actually singing and, you know, becoming, you know, just musically inclined, maybe just singing for fun, I mean, is that sort of in your mind, like, this is what a singer should sound like? Because I mean, I don't think you know, he's not somebody that I think of right away as like Steve Marriott being somebody that you sound like. I mean, to me, it's especially listening to the new End Machine record, that's when I think that just sort of the way that you use your voice, a lot of times, you know, and I don't say this lightly to too many people, it's almost like it can reach like the heights of like Jeff Tate, like peak Queensryche, and I don't know how anybody can get way up there. But you know, it's impressive. But how did you develop your style? Basically, is it just like, oh, I like these songs, I'm going to kind of sing that way, and is there a point where you're like, oh, I'm going to do things a little bit differently because of what I'm comfortable with?
I think you're always early on, you emulate or you oh, can I sing this song? Or, start doing covers or whatever. You stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say. I'm a product of everything I listened to and everything I was touched by, struck by, influenced by. I think I took, when I really decided to start singing and making money and, hopefully using this as my living, I took lessons, but I wanted to learn. I figured, okay, opera singers, you would go to your garden variety. I went through a few different instructors, and some really didn't want to deal with me because I wanted to be a rock guy and not wear a tux and sing in Italian or German or, whatever, traditional opera. Didn't want to go the opera school route, the Juilliard route, whatever. So it took me a minute to find an instructor who got it. And I figured the principles were the same. And I had a really high voice. As I developed, my speaking voice is lower than this, actually. I kind of raise it just a little bit to take strain off it. And I remember my first ear, nose, and throat specialist, the guy that took my tonsils out,
Right, sure.
Say to me, looked at my throat when I started singing, and I wasn't really singing correctly. I was just trying to fumbling, finding my way. But I'd always sung from the time I was, really, really young. My dad sang a little, singing 2-part harmony, 3-part harmony with my parents on long car drives. Those are some of my earliest memories, having favorite songs. Before I understood the math of music theory, like piano or guitar or anything like that, I could hear all these harmony parts and could pick one out. So I was that kid. I wasn't pushed into it. I was the kid who sang all the hymns at the top of his lungs at church, just because that was fun. Getting instruction from a teacher that understood what I want to do and condoned it, so to speak, encouraged it, was probably pretty instrumental to me. I did covers for a long time. I tried writing songs, worked with some original bands. I think you just eventually find your own voice. They're like fingerprints and snowflakes. They are unique. They're the people that can absolutely cop something else. I don't get that. I probably am a product of my influences in that way, where you take little things, I steal from the best. But I guess you just find your own voice. I have a clear voice. I have a gritty voice. I found a way to do both. Yeah. I'm not destroying my throat. I don't blow my throat out on the road. That was most important to me, is being able to continue to do it. So.
Right. And I would imagine, unless you're very specifically, the front man for a tribute act for one band, it doesn't actually do you any favors to try and sound exactly like somebody. It's like
you visualize yourself in the marketplace.
Yeah, right. It's like if you sound, yeah, exactly. If you sound like 1986 Sammy Hagar, that's great. But what are you going to be able to sing that isn't that? That isn't I Can't Drive 55 through the early VH stuff. So right. I think and I think that that is the interesting thing, because you'll see people who obviously start out in, you said you started in cover bands, and people who are in tribute bands, a lot of times it's just a fun thing they do, and they do have their own band, but they do sing a little differently as well, so I think not pigeonholing yourself in that, and actually just having a style that this is how I sing. And I don't know, it's also at the same time, it's like if you're out there covering a bunch of different songs, I don't want them to sound exactly like they do on the radio, do I?
Right. And that's another one of that. That's a whole different part of the conversation there, Christian, with
sure
audience's perception of how songs should sound. Now everybody comes through, one of these practically lo-fi, by real standards, little digital bits and bytes, compressed and just stuffed into what will come through the bandwidth of whatever you're listening through. And then, that's what that sounds like. A live show should be different in my estimation, but people's perception and MTV, when it came out, and, having a video representation of a song, you used to have to, I'm not lamenting, I'm not bitter about anything like that, but I am old enough to remember when you didn't know what a band really looked like or sounded like, you'd wait till Saturday Night Live or like Midnight Special or something like that.
Yeah.
see them live, then you'd have to go. You have to actually purchase a ticket. I believe it was made of paper. You, hand it to somebody.
Nobody scanned it. They had to rip it, and it like had your seat number stamped on it. You know, it was as low tech as it could have been. But
you go see them live, and but you would expect a little difference, and the danger of seeing a band live, the push and pull. That's lost on a lot of people who are not musicians. I understand that, and people want to be entertained. And I always thought that entertainers, frontmen, that were. I mean, the guy from early Black Oak, Arkansas, that David Lee Roth clearly saw and used a little bit of. I mean, maybe Dave won't admit to that. I don't know. But, David Lee Roth, I stole a lot of stuff from Dave. Marriott, like those guys are just powerful and like I said earlier, metaphorically grab every audience member by the throat or by the hair or whatever. It's like, you will listen to me. You will bond together as a unified thing. When I say jump, you say how high. And it's not about power. Maybe it is. But it's... But it's about wanting so badly to make everybody have such a great time and feel and see and experience what I do when I do my job. I know that's part of my job. I don't stare at the shoes. I don't stand. I'm not artistically just staring out and emoting. I'm entertaining people, and I run around and I will get a lot of my sweat on the people in the first few rows. Sorry.
Yeah, which may or may not be a selling point in 2021.
Maybe not so much today. Yeah, but I will probably end up, hitting every member of my band with my mic stand sometime during the night.
Yeah, and look, I think that there are obviously there's bands whose sound kind of lends itself to the guys who kind of stare at their feet, and Jim Morrison notoriously with his stage fright, and he couldn't face the audience when he started. Like that stuff's all interesting, but when it's like, well, you could, I don't know, you don't even have to talk to the audience too much, but I don't know, maybe every once in a while. So yeah, I've always enjoyed people that they bring a show and not just like, all right, yeah, we're gonna play the songs that from the album, and they're gonna kind of sound the same, and then maybe we'll say thank you at the end. It can be fun. And look, if we as the audience, the band doesn't have to be having fun on stage, but if you make us think they are, that's fine. That's almost as good, really, for us.
I mean, somebody asked me to be in a do a little bit in a couple of independent movies and some things throughout, and it's like, well, do you have any acting experiences? Well, I've pretended I'm having a great time on stage a few times when I'm having a really, really lousy one. And that's part of my job. Like, the audience doesn't care that you have a sore throat. The audience doesn't care that you got no sleep or your plane was late, or, the bass player is being an asshole, or like any, I'm not pointing out Jerry Diggs is a really nice guy. Like, it could be any band member. It could be me being a jerk that day. Like, but the audience deserves a great show. They spend their money. They pay your bills. I get to have what I have and do what I do because of people appreciating the music of whatever band I'm playing at that moment, or whatever, throughout my life doing this. So I owe them that. And I have so much fun on my side of the microphone. It's that during the course of the song, I hope that just singing the song and maybe, like you said, a few words here and there and getting people to go along with me, basically, that we're having a party right now. Your problems, leave them on the other side of the venue door. Come in, have fun. Your problems will be there when you come back. The real world will be there when you come back. It's a little bit of escapism.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've always loved that about bands that made me feel that. So I guess that's what I'm doing, is just, continuing that history with the traveling circus. We go and fly into your town. We're here for a short period of time. Let's make the most of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the End Machine, because it's one of those things where people will call it a super group, but you've played with these guys before, so it's like
it's a mediocre group.
Well, I wouldn't say that because I think the album is super, but yeah,
No, I appreciate
it's just it's a little bit of a misnomer because I don't know, like the Traveling Wilburys, that was a super group to me because those guys don't play together, you know.
Right.
But
and you had Roy Orbison, so yeah,
yeah, that's true. It's like everybody else could have stayed home and they just could have had Roy. But yeah,
they had like all lead singers and 5 rhythm guitar players in that band. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Well, they were like Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty, and
yeah, exactly. Like who stays home? Yeah, who exactly. So when it comes to the End Machine, though, I wanted to kind of talk about, you've obviously over the last 30 years, you've worked with George Lynch in particular. And I think that one, I find him to be very entertaining anytime he's interviewed, so he seems like a character, but also I think that, look, he has a great reputation. I mean, there aren't that many bands named after the guitar player. I mean, obviously Van Halen and Vinnie Vincent Invasion, Lynch Mob. I'm sure I could think of some more, but
Sure.
But I do feel at the same time he's somebody that I think that maybe doesn't come to mind for your more casual rock fan. And I don't know. I feel like he's underappreciated, but maybe that's just from my standpoint. So you've worked with him for a long time, and I'm just sort of wondering how you first got to know him, and you've worked with him and then not worked with him and then worked with him again. So I'm just sort of interested in sort of the collaboration with George over what I believe is 30 years.
Oh yeah, it's all of that.
Yeah.
Lynch Mob was my first kind of big barbecue, as they say. I was on the East Coast, found out that they were auditioning, got an audition, got the job, flew out to Arizona, started writing songs. So, I mean, that's the very short version of it. I had a couple of little successes and kind of false starts on the East Coast, New York-based record company stuff, but then found out this band, Lynch Mob, was auditioning and they needed a singer. Put a record out, but had whatever issues with the singer they had and needed to finish a tour and wanted to write a second record. So that happened for me pretty quickly in mid '91. And we made a record that I'm proud of those performances today and those songs. I got to write my first major label record that, came out. I did one before that. It didn't come out. But yeah, I mean, George spent a lot of time in a band named after the singer, so.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think there was one of those natural things. They couldn't think of a great name. I think that's the way he tells it. And the record company kind of forced Lynch Mob on him and he didn't like it. Now he doesn't like it because of, implications of the verbiage, but.
Well, yeah, now that I can understand, but I think in the moment it's kind of a cool name, like, oh yeah, George Lynch Mob, come on,
Yeah, you're right. They write these. Let's write themselves, kids. Here
you get what it is, but like, it's more like, hey, what's a Dokken anyway,
Right, it rhymes with Rocklin.
Oh yeah, good point.
That can't really be Don's last name. Come on, I've never asked him, but it's just too perfect. It doesn't happen like that. Yeah, George and I did that tour afterwards in '92, supporting Warrant in arenas. So that's where that whole thing came from. But as it happens, people want to do solo records. People don't get along as well. There's record company influence, and every time there's ego, art, and money all thrown together, and everybody talking in everybody else's ear in different camps, it sometimes can last a long time and sometimes does not. So that's what happened with Lynch Mob the first time around. Funny enough, George, when Anthony Esposito wanted to leave, George wanted to bring in Jeff Pilson. And at the time, this is '93, after our '92 tour. And we had a meeting, and I remember sitting around and George proposing that. And I thought, well, gosh, it's '93. All this Seattle stuff and grunge stuff has come out. The music industry is kind of weird. Boy, if you are Mick Brown and George and Jeff, and I like Jeff. I'd met Jeff pretty much right when I met George, like
Sure.
through George. When we were making the Lynch Mob record, I think I first met Jeff Pilson. And I thought he was a great guy, and I know he's talented and he's, smart in lots of ways. And I thought to myself, well, gosh, that's in 1983, that's you stapling me onto Dokken. And I said, why don't you get Don back and call it Dokken? And the 27-year-old me went, and like, I'm going back east. The hell with this thing, you know. So in hindsight, I don't know, we would have made a third Lynch Mob record with Jeff. So in a way, the End Machine thing, when it came around, and that's where I'm going with this, was kind of closure for me. The first record we built, it was purpose built to sound different. We wanted it to be different. We were given the leeway to do that by Frontiers, the record company. And we wanted to show our influences, do stuff that we wanted, but we did not want to make it a carbon copy of Dokken or Lynch Mob, although it was going to sound a little bit like that in places. Sure. I don't know if you're familiar with the first record. We wanted that to be its own animal, because obviously the comparisons will be there. Before it came out, everybody said, well, is it just Dokken? Because of the members, is it just Dokken without Don? You know, that kind of thing. So I think we took a little time to do that, and got a little more experimental with the first record. For phase two, we went back to, I mean, there's a reason why that chemistry between Jeff and George works and worked in the past. There's a reason why they got that history with the Dokken band. Mick no longer wanted to be involved, and we respected that. I mean, he really retired. So we got his younger brother, Steve.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting. So Mick Brown, who had been the drummer in Dokken, he did the first one with you. And then you're just sort of reading that, so it's like, well, let's keep it in the family at least. And let's have his brother, you know, it's almost like
we can and get the guy.
Right. Right. Exactly. It's like, it's like Springsteen replaces Clarence Clemens with his nephew. You know, because it's like, well, at least it's in the and by the way, he's a tremendous sax player, so it's great. That's that. You know, it's just more like, let's look at that. Let's see how that works. So, and I think it has a great sound. The second record, and you know, I think that the first one, I think, you know, had a little bit more of a bluesy hard rock sound, but I still feel like it's not like it's gone in this, you know. But listening to it a lot over the last couple weeks. I think I got into my head that there were days where I'm like, well, I think it might be a concept album. And I'm like, no, I think the songs just all kind of have a unified theme. Not even a theme though, because that would be a concept album. It just has like a sound that's consistent. And I'm like, well, a lot of albums don't really kind of sound that way anymore. You know, look, a lot of times an album comes out because it's like, oh yeah, we put out these 3 singles last year, and then we have an EP, and then, you know, and it's just like, oh, we're going to put a bunch of stuff out. But I think that maybe that's just what it was that it was a cohesive album. I mean, I think that there might be a couple of themes that sneak in and out of the songs, but maybe I was reading too much into it though.
Well, no, and I'm glad you bring that up, because the Dokken philosophy, ethos, whatever you want to call it, it seemed as though the subject matter in a lot of those songs, you know, granted it was the early 80s, and maybe that's what sold it. Everybody needed a power ballad, everybody needed this and that, you know. But thematically, a lot of the stuff that was written between, I guess, Don and Jeff mostly, I would imagine, lyrically, was that, you know, I've made the joke in the past, I listen to old Dokken and it seems like Don's always having problems with his lady. You know, like it was a lot of relationship gone wrong kind of stuff, or, you know, that kind of thing. I really wanted to stay away from that.
Yeah.
Not that it's bad in any way, but that would really lock it into a dated callback to the Dokken thing. And although we did that musically, I think we just allowed ourselves, George and Jeff, musically mostly, because that's where the music, you know, that's where that things come from. That in this band, they send me instrumentals and then say, okay, what do you think? You know, and in the case of the first record, things were overwritten. There were parts that would appear way too many times, you know, for me, and I would kind of wrangle it in and say, okay, here's what I have as melody and lyric. This section's too long. And then the magic of digital editing, you know, Jeff and I would go in the studio and I was like, okay, this thing happens this many bars. Can we cut 16 bars of this out of here? Because it sounds like an opus. Like, you know, let's get this song, if we can, down to 4 minutes. Can we please? You know, from not whatever it is. And we would do that cut and paste thing. And then we would put all that together. A bridge would kind of just happen between the two of us. I had just reams and reams of lyrics in either an iPad or a Mac or my phone, where throughout traveling around and you spend a lot of time in the quiet, on airplanes and stuff like that, I would just write whatever I think or see, or if you're reading a book or if you see a movie or you're walking in the mall or you're walking around some city, things come to me and I'll just put them down. Hopefully they're significant enough. Some are not. They're still on the phone. Some of them get made into songs. So I was allowed to do that. We allowed ourselves to do that really freely on the first record. This record, we went a little bit more purpose-built to give fans, like certain audiences, I think, want Jeff and George to play those, to write songs, not so they all sound the same. And it's not a rehash of Dokken by any means. Like, none of us think that. But some of those things that the way George plays, it sounds like the way George plays in a lot of ways. I'm not going to try to pull him outside of his box. So some of these songs, I'm like, oh, that reminds me of the idea behind a few different Dokken songs kind of melded in. It's like, well, let's write to that. Then we got on Zoom meetings, because that's what you did, through most of last year. And the three of us, Jeff, George, and myself, would bat ideas around instead of just giving me free reign or, hey, you just write melodies and lyrics. Because I know I want that combination of Jeff and George to give me little inspirations. And if either of them was thinking something lyrically, they might come up and say, hey, I've got this thing. And Jeff would send me a real quick recording of even just a chorus or just a bridge. And then I would take that and fill in the blanks, so to speak. And we would do that through a lot of these meetings. So it's the three of us. And, I joked in something earlier I was talking to somebody about. I was like, I even took suggestions for melodies from George. Lyrics so much. No, but I'm kidding. He's great. I know he's a smart guy and he reads a lot. And he's got very passionate ideas. So if he brought me a theme, I'd be like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. Let me go overwrite a boatload of lyrics about that and whittle it down to what our common ideas are. So this was a concerted effort among the three of us to do something that maybe satisfied the Dokken audiences, that legacy feel, without sounding cheesy or dated. If I can use two really trite words to say that.
No, yeah, but I mean, I think that I think especially, there are definitely there's plenty of bands who, there are going to be a couple tracks on records from 25, 30 years ago that are like, oh, that didn't hold up, but the rest of it does, and I think that, it's when you listen to, like, on Sirius XM, there's a channel that's tailor made for late 80s and early 90s hard rock, and they call it Hair Nation, which is something that in particular I know Eddie Trunk hates that term, and I think a lot of people find it upsetting, but that's sort of the catch-all for it. And I think you'll hear some songs that are like, oh, these are great, these are still great, and then you hear some like, oh boy, that takes me back. So you don't want to write a song in 2021 that has the oh, that takes me back feel, because it shouldn't be taking you back to anywhere other than right now, So, I mean, I think that's just the way that I see it in terms of that. But I think it has a very modern sound, and I think you might have frozen a little bit there video wise. So let me pop out Robert for a second for those that are watching the video, and we'll see if he pops back in. But always fun having these longer conversations, and it was just an interesting thing because there was a little pop out there, yeah, and I think I lost him entirely, which is always fun. But I think that that always gives me the opportunity to vamp when I can point out that if you're listening to the Bladtcast, the audio version, you can, of course, go to the Bladtcast YouTube page and find us at the Bladtcast on YouTube. That is where we often are found, is the Bladtcast YouTube page, where I'm doing this live right now, and also on Facebook and on Periscope. And hopefully Robert's able to pop back on before too long. You can like the Bladtcast on Facebook, BLADTCAST, Bladtcast.com. We have all of those things. There's so many different ways to do it. For those of you that just get the audio version of the old podcast, we appreciate that as well. Popping back on is Robert Mason. We appreciate you coming back. And
Weirdest thing, I apologize for that. Just had one of those weird, like your internet went down and I've like crazy fast, very efficient internet access here. And for some reason it just went bye-bye. Sorry about that.
Wow. Well, yeah, because I thought you were just sitting like listening with your arm kind of the way you are right now. And then I'm like, oh no, that's a frozen image.
Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you hopping back on using the cell phone. So just sort of what I was talking about, it's great to use, have musicians collaborate who maybe have worked together for a long time, like you're talking specifically George Lynch, Jeff Pilson, but you don't want their compositions in 2021 you can have the songs that are the nostalgia songs and then the songs that hold up, but you don't want your new songs to have that feeling. That's what I was saying, so to have a modern feel from guys who you're like, oh yeah, these guys are great. And having sort of that sort of approach, I think, is what really helps the End Machine, the Phase 2 record.
I'm happy to find out. Let's see on April 9th when
everybody,
hopefully, goes and gets their ears around it, and we'll see what happens. I mean, we're hoping for the best. We always do.
Sure.
It's a lot of the thing about those songs is it's how you, and the performances as well. It's something you did that day. It's how you felt that moment.
Sure.
It's not, I don't write things thinking this is how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life or make sometimes there's strong statements, sure. And I can write in narrative form, about something else. It's funny how fans attach themselves to songs. I understand why, because I've become attached to songs, but then I realized once I started doing this for a living that, maybe Peter Criss didn't feel like that great about Beth every day of his life, that's, it's a funny thing, but the audience's perception of that, it's, the thing they don't understand, and I don't blame them at all, is that's just how I felt that day. That's the performance I gave that moment in the recording studio. I might be a completely different person with a different, viewpoint the next day, or it might not have even been about me. People come up to you, ask you about lyrics, and you're like, I was just telling a story. I don't really know.
Yeah, it's interesting. About a year ago, I spoke with Dave Pirner, the lead singer of Soul Asylum, and they have they have a bunch of successful songs, but inarguably their most successful song is that song "Runaway Train." And I kind of asked him about having one of those songs that you always have to play, and he's like, no, I get it, but he actually lets the audience decide. He's like, do you guys want to hear Runaway Train, or maybe you want to hear another one? And so he said some nights they don't want to hear it. And he's like, well, great, because I don't need to hear it, and I think that's a great approach, because
and I agree. I laugh when bands have a hugely successful song and then they whine about having to play it for the rest of their lives. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
But I understand it. It's, by the time a song comes out, I've listened to the instrumental, written lyrics and melodies to it, sung it bunches of times, recorded it in the studio, reviewed mixes. So I've heard it thousands of times before anybody hears it for the first time. I'm always struck by someone's first impression of something, and then you go, oh, I get re-inspired by it. And it's nothing as gratifying as having somebody tell you they like what you do.
Sure.
Why the first time I played a little song on the piano for my parents' friends and they clapped, I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
I mean, short of getting, cake or something like that,
wow.
Like when you're that little. I mean, it's cake. Well,
but I mean, yeah, exactly. If they really liked the song, they'd give me cake. You were talking about, sort of conferencing on Zoom. Obviously, that's how a lot of stuff was happening over the last year. Did you guys kind of exchange all the music that way, or did you have an opportunity to get in the studio finally, or how did it work in terms of, this had to be a unique collaboration compared to anything else you'd worked on before?
Jeff and George, everybody's got a recording studio of sorts in their home. We do. I don't mean everybody in the collective, everybody, of course, but we do. Yeah. So we were able to work independently. As I did on the last record, I waited for George and Jeff's instrumentals to come pouring in via, download or email or whatever, and listen to those and see how those hit me. Took a little time to do that. And then we just got on these meetings where we would bat these ideas around, like I said earlier. But eventually, yeah, I mean, Jeff's got a wonderful recording studio near his place, just north of LA. So with all this COVID stuff, I think the first time I flew out there, but after that I drove out. I think I took 2 trips, a few days at a time. And Jeff and I, have been isolated pretty much. We made sure we were COVID free and safe.
Yeah, sure.
And we just got together and recorded just like we did the last time. Although this time I had a lot more prepared. I would go in for the last record just having listened to an instrumental, not having sung anything to anybody. And Jeff and I work really well together. I would just, like I said, get into my phone. This is what I'm thinking melodically, lyrically, and I would send him, airdrop him a bunch of stuff, and we'd print it out and hash through it. And sometimes he said, "This is amazing right here. We don't have to change a thing." I was like, "Well, I still need to change stuff." We would mock it up and do a rough scratch vocal with both of us in the same room, and then refine it a little further, figure out harmonies and all that stuff. We between the two of us were very like-minded. Then I just get in the studio that day, and I did that 11 times for the last record. And in 11 days, I had all the songs done. So
wow.
This time around, and it would start with nothing but an instrumental track at the beginning,
right,
and with all this done, because I had all that backlog of lyrics and a working knowledge, because I had heard them. I would listen to each one several times and kind of get an idea. First, a melodic idea, or maybe just I've got lyrics as, "Ooh, this, I can make this fit." Kind of the Bernie Taupin, Elton John thing,
Yeah.
And we would just do it that way. This way, I had a lot of predetermined stuff. I would demo stuff in my house and send it to them. And then, from their instrumental, after a Zoom meeting and some lyric, I'd call them lyric writing arguments back and forth, where we all try to get our way. They would leave me to my own devices, and I would later on that day or the next day send them a very rough scratch version or versions of their instrumentals with what we had worked on, lyric and melody wise. And more often than not, I would just hear back, "Oh my God," instantly George is like, "That's the chorus. That's great. That's great." Because they would go on, and I would put them on mute and walk away and refill my coffee mug or whatever, come back.
Right, sure.
And they're just, I can see them chatting in the background, but I've got the whole thing muted out, and I'm just going, I'm writing. I would take the computer off mute, and they'd still be talking about whatever lyrics or whatever. And I'd say, "Hey, check your phones. I just texted you all the lyrics for this song. I just wrote it while you guys were yammering on with each other."
Well, the first single, Blood Money, there's a video for it. Now, similar sort of question, we're at the point in the pandemic where I'm like, okay, so are they out in the field all kind of spaced out in the video for social distancing, or just because it looks cool, because I'm like,
very perceptive.
Yeah, because the video could, if you could have shot that video 3 years ago and it still would have looked like that. But I'm like, oh, but they're pretty far apart, But then I also like that, of course, there's also this kind of a cool narrative, like a Fight Club for money sort of a narrative that's going on at the same time, So it's a little intercut. So talk a little bit about the video.
Well, the themes for the video, we let Frontiers just run because they wanted to do that. Some of it was tied to the lyrics, and some kind of isn't for my taste, but I totally understand it. Given the restrictions of filming and all the other stuff we had to do, yes, we did our parts on the same day, but separate from each other.
Okay.
With a crew that had been tested, and we were all fine and all that kind of stuff. But yes, we did. We filmed that out in Northern California, Central California, not too far away from Jeff's house. Outdoors, I guess that was the determination. I mean, does that fit everything? No, but it kind of looks cool.
Yeah.
And as you do in videos, you have to mime and lip sync and perform to the track. You're not doing this live, but it was an interesting process. I think it was more of a nightmare for the director and editor, because he couldn't get multiple band members in one shot, because I guess it was determined that it was just safest to do that. I don't know. It was a few months ago. I was like, well, sure. What the heck? Not ideal, but it worked out okay. And the Blood Money video is interesting.
And there's by the way, there was both blood and money in the video. I don't want to give too much away.
That was the Frontiers idea. Yeah, I know.
They're like, we
guys.
can't just have money. We need to have the
No.
blood too. All right.
You know what they say? Where there's blood, and I don't know.
I think my favorite song on the album is "Crack the Sky," which no one's asking, but I would say that could be a good follow-up single in the video if anybody does ask. But
I
think
is that just got released. You are
what? Wow!
You should mention.
It's almost as if I knew, but I swear I really didn't know.
Last Friday, I think they
okay.
"Crack the Sky," which is filmed on the same day.
Sure.
I will break the fourth wall. Tell the world. This is you might recognize some of the woods in a different location, but the same. Yeah, we just kind of did them in one big, honest to God, super long day, and it's got a continuation on that theme, sort of related. But "Crack the Skies," I like to leave mystery. I don't like when and a little ambiguity in the lyrics, so they could be interpreted in different ways. It's although you try to come up with a story, if that's the way you're writing, or imagery with you try to make your own cliches, so to speak. I don't want to use too many cliches, but you end up using a few, and that's the way lyrics go in rock bands. But yeah, I mean, I think I wore a spoiler alert, I changed my look. I put my hair up in a hat for the "Crack the Sky" video.
All right. Well, so then
both of these the same day.
It clearly is going to look like a different day if your hair is in a
completely
hat.
different. It's funny.
Yeah.
I would get messages or comments or text messages. Did you cut your hair? I'm like, it's a hat.
And it's interesting.
My hair,
It's interesting what you're saying about lyrics, because a lot of times when people who when any kind of lyricist explains their lyrics, a lot of times you're like, no, I didn't think it was about that. Don't ruin my song.
No, I don't mind anyone's interpretation. Honestly, It's interesting to find out when you do meet and greets or you do interviews, talking to fans, outside shows, stuff like that. Like they're so influenced by something, and they get it completely different than your original intent or whatever inspired you with the lyrics. Or sometimes they'll just be so spot on. It's like, did you look at are you looking at my journals on my phone? Like, but then at least you're reaching them one way or the other. I love hearing people's interpretations, but I do like leaving certain things ambiguous enough so that other people can say, oh, I felt like that. Or, oh, I think I know what he's talking about. I saw that, regardless of what they think, how they define the song to them. That's part of the fun of art and interpretation.
Yeah, and not so much an interpretation, but the song "Plastic Heroes" has a turn of phrase that I really liked that definitely stuck in my head, the dopamine parasites, because I feel like that combination of phrase works really well, because it's like, I'm pretty sure we all have people that if you had the phrase in your head, like, oh yeah, they're a total dopamine parasite,
I thankfully, words are my toys. Words are my playthings. I love doing that. Thank you. That means a lot, because I wonder whether that really impacts people. But then a song like "Plastic Heroes," that was one of the ones. George and Jeff are going on, and they want it to be something else. I'm like, no. And then I can't think of it. I went to go refill and then throw like some lukewarm coffee in the microwave at my place. Right over there, folks. Right over there. Went back into my studio office, which is adjacent to this room. This is the piano room. This is piano, guitars, and amps. And then there's a wall, but there's a common wall. And I have a panel, like a circuit, little electronic panel where I can hook in. I can mic stuff here and record it in there. So I walk back in there where the big computer is, a big screen and all. And I walk back, I take them off mute. I'm like, "Plastic Heroes." And they go, "Oh, those are cool words. What's it about?" I'm like, "Give me a minute. I've been writing." They're like, "Give me 5.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
I furiously thumb typing into my phone and sent them, I think, pre-chorus and chorus. And when they saw that, they're like, "Ooh, dopamine parasites." I'm like, yeah. So instantly Jeff got it. George loved it. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Just give me another pot of coffee, and then I'll have the lyrics for you.
That's how Jeff and I operate, man. It's like first cup of coffee in the morning, and that's how we roll into the studio and go create.
Yeah. Well, obviously there's a lot of great songs on the album. We're talking about Phase 2, and both albums are on Frontiers Records. And I think Frontiers is one of those labels that I think a lot of people who buy new music from any kind of classic artist, they don't necessarily even realize that they probably have some from Frontiers music, and I think that they put out so much, but I personally, as just a fan of music, I appreciate it because I think a lot of, I mean, I don't even want to single anybody out, but there are definitely artists who, if Frontiers didn't put out their album, they wouldn't be doing new albums. There's bands who could probably still do a greatest hits tour, but not put out any kind of new albums. And I think that Frontiers puts out so much. So I did like the idea that, again, to go with Supergroup, this was actually sort of their idea, I guess, to put the band together.
It sort of was. It was initially something that George and Frontiers were talking about. He was trying to figure out whether or not he wanted to have a cavalcade of names come in and sing on it or play on it or whatever. I think very, very early on it was just a conceptual thing with Frontiers and George, and then he got Jeff involved because they live in the same state, they're kind of neighbors, and Jeff's got a great recording studio, he's a smart producer, and they have history. Then they called me and said, well, would you be interested if it was me, Jeff, and George? And then we got Mick. I'm like, well, and that's when it became sort of closure for me, like making a third Lynch Mob record, so to speak. But yeah, Frontiers is great with that, though. They want to do that. They're very passionate about that. Not so much legacy, I guess it's legacy stuff, but melodic rock, and they understand their market and how they can serve those fans. And they do put out a lot of stuff. They put out a lot of great stuff, though, and
absolutely
they discover new artists too. But they do put they have that like fantasy football kind of ethos where they'll go like, what if this guy would play with that guy and this guy, and then this guy can play drums,
right?
Let's call them all and see what who will do it.
Well, yeah, so Phase 2 is the album, and it is out April 9th. You can always pre-order it now in a variety of different formats. You've been very generous with your time. I'm going to try and take a couple more of your minutes, if you don't mind, because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you've been the singer for Warrant for a number of years. And I think there's a couple of different ways that sometimes, bands replace a singer for a variety of reasons. You can do, and look, I like that we know who let the dogs out. No one let the dogs out, but the idea, because look, you can do what Journey did.
You can hear him; he's going bananas right now.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
I don't know. That door's open. I don't know
He just rather stay in. You could do, you could do what Journey did, and Arnel Pineda. I saw them perform with him. He's amazing. Yes. He is like, well, let's get a guy who's sort of what we were talking about before. Let's get a guy who sounds like Steve Perry. Doesn't look anything like him, but let's do that. And I think that, there's another school of thought, for a number of years, Great White had Terry Lou from XYZ, and that's a very different sound than Jack Russell had. Mm-hmm. So I feel like the guys in Warrant, it was a little bit more of, we know Robert, we know he's a great singer. Let's work with him. And it wasn't like, Robert, can you sing like Janie Lane? Because at no point that any of the recordings I've ever heard, you don't sing like Janie. You sing your own, you put your own stamp on his music.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna fix this. Take a walk with me.
Come with Robert. Let's see the house. Let's see the walking tour. This is like an Aaron Sorkin show where you walk and talk throughout the house, and we let the dogs out.
Hear the dialogue because of all the you somehow hear it. Come on. Oh. So high maintenance. 1-year-old Rhodesian Ridgeback, who's just
Jacob in the chat appreciates the walkthrough tour.
Come here, bud. Come here. Come on. Oh my gosh, yes. We're gonna finish this up, and then you and I are gonna go do something. My goodness. Anyway, so yeah, those guys. Look, Warrant guys have always been friends to me and to Lynch Mob, and my friendship with Janie was most of the reason why initially Lynch Mob was supporting Warrant Arenas in '92. So when this came about, they needed a guy. I've talked ad nauseum in interviews about all that kind of stuff, but I think very early on, Jerry kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey man, you write songs, right?" It's like, yeah. I was, well, why don't we do a record?
Yeah.
And so they were never afraid of that. I mean, Jane and I were friends. I was a fan. He was a great songwriter, really good frontman, great singer. But we're different. I have different influences, some same, some different. I know we sound different. I went back to that, voices are like fingerprints thing. I never felt pressure to sing like him in any way, but the melodies of the songs and the way those songs were arranged and performed, I do my damnedest to do that justice to the material and to the legacy. And fans have been really friendly to that, and amenable to that whole. It's a pretty major change, I mean, you think about it, Brian Johnson's still the new guy in AC/DC,
So 40 years later, yeah.
Right. He's the kid, the new kid.
Yeah.
So I understood the weight of that, I guess, but was never really afraid of it because I saw these, these four guys, these other, guys are the original members or whatever you want to call it. They're, through all the success of that band, they needed a guy to go do that. And I'm a guy that could go do that. The songs I can sing them okay. And I do my damnedest. We've put out 2 records. We might do more. 2020 was the 30th anniversary of Cherry Pie.
Right. Yeah.
Not to lament that would be bitter, but we're just going to take a mulligan on the entire thing. I'm like, nope, it's still the 30th anniversary of Cherry Pie.
And that was one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about, is that I saw that Warrant has 30th anniversary Cherry Pie dates. And there's a bunch of them booked. There's even some booked in Southern California. And I'm like, oh, are we getting concerts again? In like July
we have dates from June through the end of the year, kind of like, but it's, this has been a year and a half of your livelihood and your life and what you're used to getting just basically removed. Nope. You got to stay at home. I mean, I know everybody's had to go through that, but I think that when we get a little bit more confidence, and now there's some promoters willing to distance and take the right precautions and take a chance, everything I hear is people just will come back and definitely want to come back and rock out with a vengeance. And I know I will.
I mean, I'm friends with a guy in the band, but I drove like an hour and a half a couple weekends ago to see my friend's Kiss tribute band play in a parking lot in Lake Elsinore, California, which is like close to San Diego. And I'm like, wait, there's going to be music? It's outside. It gets a little windy. Yeah, I'll be there. That's fine. It's just the idea of seeing live music again for the first time in the year. And that's the thing about it being warmer. I think I'm assuming, a bunch of the dates that Warrant has lined up, some of them are probably outdoor venues. And I think that in general, that's what people are probably most comfortable with. And then you have, then you have bands who have like toured, they do like 7 dates in Florida and like 9 dates in Texas, because it's like, well, you can really play a lot of places in those states,
And we have the same. We have Texas shows, Colorado shows, and a lot of them are outdoors. A lot of our dates have moved forward 1 calendar year from 2020's dates. So I think in anticipation of what's hopefully starting to trend and happen now, a lot of these promoters, that they wanted to keep our show. It was just the safest thing to do at the time was say, okay, well, it was July 2020. Let's just make it July 2021. And thankfully, I will be the happiest guy in the world to stand on, like I always say, my side of a mic and have people on the other side. And if there's a giant sneeze guard or whatever I have to do to say, away from them to make people feel safe, I still want people to have that live concert experience. Even if these days people don't clap because their one hand's got a phone in it. It's
yeah.
How do I do this?
Yeah, I would clap, but I'm busy making a video that I'm never going to watch.
Right, I'm busy. Yes, I'm busy showing all my followers that I was actually here instead of being here, enjoying being here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and look, I mean, just it's the same thing. It's like, you're starting to get reduced capacity at like sporting events and in movie theaters, and it's like, well, you're gonna have to wear a mask. I'm like, I mean, I'll put on a welder's mask. I'll put on a scuba suit. Like, what do you need? I'll do it when I show up. It's fine, So so I was excited to read that, and obviously Warrant Rocks is the website, and hopefully people can see that. So this is sort of it goes back to the End Machine, and I'll let you and the dog go after this. It has to be so complicated to try and get End Machine to play any live dates. Now, I heard an interview with you earlier, like about a month ago. You were on with Don Jamieson. I think you guys have played live shows, but not very many, because everybody's got, what Jeff's still in Foreigner, right? So obviously that's going to be job one for him, So is there any hope that maybe you guys might find a window where you can do something, or it's just same as it always is, that we'll play if we can, but we're not holding our breath?
That is, as they used to say, the $64,000 question. I don't know what the money is up to now, but we would love to. It takes a lot of work, though. We'd need to rehearse. We'd need to get a crew together. We need to actually do it. And yeah, we did 3 shows the last time. I know Frontiers wanted us to go tour, but I had so many Warrant dates. George was in, I think, 4 or 6 bands at the time, and trying to lynch mob stuff in clinics and everything else he does. Yeah. And Jeff's the MD. He's the musical director in Foreigner, so he wears a lot of hats. It was tough to do, and it still is tough to do. I can't say no, but a listening party, semi-acoustic performance thing was thrown around early on. We'd love to build some hype for this and play some of these songs, and we've got the history to the degree that we can probably play a couple of Dokken songs, whatever. I'd love to go overseas with this. I'd love to take it to Japan and show those audiences what the End Machine is all about, and we can do a couple of Lynch Mob, a couple of Dokken songs. We don't regret or look down our nose at any of the history and the demand for that kind of stuff. I would gladly do that if that meant I got to play, live. But Warrant's my gig, and when we go back to that, that's going to be, getting on planes and flying out and playing shows for most of the rest of this year. So we shall see. We never say never, but it's a difficult proposition.
Yeah. Well, you have to do the 31st and a half anniversary of Cherry Pie, and then the 33rd anniversary of Dirty Rotten Filthy Stinking Rich, so there's always going to be an anniversary along the way. And by the way, for what you were saying earlier, for inflation, Jacob says the $64,000 question is now the $698,460.41 question. So thank you for that, Jacob. Well, Robert,
if there are 4 words that describe me, they are good with math.
Good. Well, Robert, thank you so much for being generous with your time and also giving us the walkthrough of your house. Very excited for people to hear the new album, The End Machine Phase 2. You can get it wherever you get albums, wherever you get your music digitally. And I know there's a variety of vinyl versions. So people just, I guess that's just how you say it. It's like, just get it wherever you get your music, right?
Exactly. Download it, get the limited edition vinyl. I'm going to have Frontiers try to send me one of each.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, you're in the band, so you should be able to get the Europe only,
One would think, yeah.
Well, and let's give a shout out to the dog. What's the dog's name?
Rhodey.
Well,
his crate command is backstage.
Well, Robert, Rhodey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. The End Machine Phase 2. And thank you to everybody who was in the live chat and watching the archive version. Make sure you like the Bladtcast on Facebook, BLADTCAST on Twitter. We will see you next time on the Bladtcast.